Good afternoon, members. Thank you so much for being with us here today for this special virtual member talk. It's our last one of 2022. And today you're going to learn all about the Solstice Sea Star Search. Say that 5 times quickly. It's a new project launched by our community science team to find and document sea stars living along the California coast. It's coming up soon, December 20th to 23rd. And our directors of community science, Dr. Rebecca Johnson and Alison Young, are here to tell you what they're looking for and why now, and how to get involved. And it is, may I add, a potentially wonderful and fun outing for visiting family. So Rebecca and Alison will be answering your questions at the end of the talk. So please drop any questions that you have for them in the YouTube chat section. And if you need help with that and signing up for an account, we've posted instructions in the YouTube description. So I'm gonna bring up Alison first, who's gonna kick us off. Hey, Alison.
Hello.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to hear about this new project. I'm gonna bring up your slides and we'll get going.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Christina. Yeah, so I'm going to give a little background kind of on why we're doing this Solstice Sea Star Search. So you'll be hearing from me kind of for the first half of the talk, and then I'll turn it over to my co-director, Dr. Rebecca Johnson, to talk kind of about the specifics about the talk, how to participate, and what we're looking for, things like that as well. So thank you so much. So yeah, I'm Alison Young, along with Rebecca Johnson. We co-direct the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the Academy. And we also co-direct the Thriving California Strategic Initiative, if you've heard about that. And Rebecca will be kind of we'll bring that up a little bit in the second part of our talk. So as part of our work, a big part of our work in our community science department is basically getting people out wherever they are, locally here in the Bay Area, but we also have programs that are global, and documenting local biodiversity. And we do this through like campaigns that we kind of put the word out and ask people to go out and look for things in particular. And we also hold in-person events as well for, bringing people together at one place at one time to not only document biodiversity, but also what we're hoping through those in-person events is to kind of build community around nature as well, and to really connect people to nature no matter where they are in the world. If you're in a city or if you're out someplace more remote, that have people really appreciate that nature is around you no matter where you are, and to hopefully kind of build some of that nature connection through documenting and learning more about your local biodiversity. So both Rebecca and I are marine biologists. I'm an intertidal ecologist, so I studied places like tide pools. Rebecca studies nudibranchs, so she's an invertebrate taxonomist. So we're kind of coming to the marine realm from two different places. But when we were starting our community science project, we knew that we wanted to have at least one project that was really about connecting people to the ocean. And there really is no better place to do that than the tide pools, the rocky intertidal, just the incredible diversity of life that you can see in the tide pools is rival. I think it's probably one of the most diverse places where you can see so much in such a small space anywhere in California. And so we bring people together out. One of our main sites is Pillar Point, which is just north of Half Moon Bay on the San Mateo coast. If you've heard of the Maverick Surf Contest, that is where this is the reef basically that's underneath that forms those waves. And we bring people together to do some long-term monitoring there and to also build kind of a species atlas. So what's out there. So in this little video, you can see anemones and urchins. We passed a sea star there a second ago, lots of different types of algae, kelps, things like that. And there are a group of volunteers that are out there taking photos of things and helping us monitor a suite of species through time. There was also a beautiful sunset on this day, which made it into that video as well. But we bring people together, and we've been bringing people together at Pillar Point now since 2012 to document biodiversity. And one of the main species that when you go out to the tide pools that you can see are these ochre stars, or Pyzaster ochraceus. These are kind of like the California coast sea star, like the iconic sea star along the California coast. And really quickly, you'll hear us probably go back and forth between sea star and starfish. You'll probably hear people have mentioned, you probably have heard that, sea stars are not fish, so you should call them sea stars. We're not super precious about that language, so you'll hear us go between both of those. But these ochre stars, you can see, have like a wide variety of colors. Here in this photo, you can see orange ones and purple ones and kind of ones that are in between, a more brownish color. We could have a whole presentation on why ochre stars have all this different coloration. So we're not going to dive into that now, but these are considered keystone species along the California coast and also the kind of the west coast of North America, because one of their main foods that they like to eat are mussels. They actually kind of clear sections of mussel bed, which allows other species to come in and settle in that cleared space. I did my master's work on kind of like maybe there's actually more diversity in those mussel beds than what those sea stars allow, but I'm not going to go into that right now either. But these ochre sea stars are definitely one of our iconic sea star species, one of the most abundant sea star species in California. And like I said, we started our work in Pillar Point in 2012, and then starting in 2013 and going into 2014, we started seeing those ochre stars that look like this, that they had these white lesions, and they basically were kind of like dissolving in place. And this was the start of sea star wasting disease, which I'm sure you've heard of. It hit the entire west coast of North America, basically from Alaska all the way down to Mexico. It affected multiple species, but basically kind of the symptoms were all the same across these species, that they would develop these white lesions, kind of their arms would start to fall off, or sometimes they'd actually tear their own arms off as they were developing these lesions, and they would basically kind of just dissolve. They would turn into sea star goo. The reasons behind sea star wasting disease are not 100% figured out. There are lots of different factors that seem to have caused sea star wasting disease. There is some denso virus that are associated with some species of sea star, but not all of them. And so for a while, that was thought that it might have been a main cause of sea star wasting disease. It seems like the species that have these denso viruses, they always have them, but there was something that kind of triggered them to kind of really like bloom and become kind of out of control in sea stars during this time. More recent research has actually pointed to the microbial community that actually lives on the surface of starfish. And basically when those microbial communities start to grow out of control, it makes it so the stars themselves actually can't get any oxygen. Like those microbes actually take up all available oxygen on the surface of those sea stars, and then the sea stars themselves can't get any oxygen. So that is now thought to be another cause of sea star wasting disease, especially because it crossed so many different species. What we know for sure is that this seems to be in response to rapid environmental changes. And what was going on back then when sea star wasting disease really started being noticed farther north, kind of in late 2013. And then by mid 2014, we kind of saw it all the way down here in California as well. And you could see this was the time that we had the formation of that warm water blob that now seems to show up off the California coast. Multiple times now it's shown up, but you can really see what we're looking at in these maps are kind of like the average sea surface temperature would be white, and so times when it's colder are blue, and times when it's warmer than average are red. And you can see them along, if you look at the west coast of North America, that we have kind of cooler temperatures in 2013, but 2014 it's getting warmer. In 2015 you can see it was very warm off of our coast, and we have that like blob of warm water sitting off of our coast there. And so this was happening at the same time sea star wasting disease was going on, and we think this is one of the main triggering factors at the time. So like I said, sea star wasting disease affected not just those ochre stars, but other stars as well. And one of the main stars that it affected is the sunflower star, Pycnopodia helianthoides. And these sea stars are amazing. They have lots of arms, usually somewhere between like 16 and 24 arms. They move really fast. They're very different than those ochre stars that are usually just attached to a rock. These guys can cruise up and down channels. We used to see them at Pillar Point when we started our monitoring program in 2012, and they would be moving quickly kind of through the channels that go through the tide pools, basically looking for food. And this species was really hard hit by the sea star wasting disease, that they really just like dissolved completely. And kind of looking a lot across the entire west coast of North America, this is a kind of a figure taken from some research and a recent kind of report on these sunflower stars and kind of a roadmap to recovery. You can look at different sections of the coast here and see they've kind of estimated what percentage of the local sunflower star population they think basically was destroyed, lost during sea star wasting disease. And you can see along the west coast of North America, it's a huge number. They think 5.75 billion sunflower stars died of sea star wasting disease, and there was about a 94% decline in the population globally. So this the sunflower star was basically kind of extirpated off of our coast. And if you could look at California, you can see it's very in the high 90s, up to 100% in some places of California, that they think we've lost sunflower stars. So while other sea star species like ochre stars have actually started recovering from sea star wasting disease, you can go out to the tide pools now along the California coast and see ochre stars. You will not go out to the coast when you go out to the tide pools. What you don't usually see are sunflower stars. And so this is a species that basically has been extirpated along the California coast. So we're not just talking about stars, we're also talking about kelp forests, and I promise there will be a connection between sea stars and kelp forests and community science. So now we're kind of going to move into a little bit about kelp forest here. This is a beautiful photo of a healthy kelp forest. And I want to quickly just mention that we have kind of two types of kelp forests along the California coast that are dominated by two different species of kelp. On the left here, we have bull kelp, which is an annual species. So it kind of grows every year. It kind of gets ripped out during the winter storms and then grows again the next year. And bull kelp has a really long stipe and attaches by one long stipe to the floor. It has one nematocyst, kind of an air bladder at the top of it with these long fronds at the top. And this species of kelp dominates our northern kelp forest. So kind of you can think about the Bay Area almost kind of being that separation point. You can find both of these species in kelp forest kind of along the coast, but in the north coast, it's dominated by this bull kelp. And farther south, so going from the south of the Bay Area, we have giant kelp, which is what dominates most of our kelp forest, this macrocystis right here, which is a perennial species. It is not an annual, so it's always there. And it has all these fronds along the entire thing. And this is the type of kelp that we really associate with sea otters. When you see those adorable photos like this one of sea otters that wrap themselves in kelp so they don't float away while they're sleeping and just generally do those adorable things like that, it's the giant kelp, so the more southern kelp forest that we're thinking of. You can see in this photo here, this otter actually does have a stipe of a bull kelp, like a broken stipe across the front of it up there, but it's wrapped in that giant kelp. So like I said, you can see both types of kelp in our kelp forest, but north is bull kelp and south is dominated by the giant kelp. So sea otters are actually a really important part of this story. We used to have sea otters basically along the entire west coast of North America. That gray in this map is the historic range of sea otters, which you can see basically from the Aleutian Islands all the way down through Southern California into Mexico. But sea otters were hunted for their fur, and we basically did a really great job, or people prior to us did a very good job of wiping out sea otters along our coast. So you can see now the current range, there's one species, two subspecies. There's a northern sea otter and a southern sea otter. The southern sea otter range is in orange, which you can see a little bit on the California coast. And then the yellow is the northern sea otter, the current range of the northern sea otter. And zooming in along the California coast or the United States coast, you can see the current range of sea otters is basically kind of like Point Conception area to Pigeon Point. Along the San Mateo coast. People have seen sea otters farther north than that. We see them in the Bay Area. They actually come into San Francisco Bay every once in a while. This observation, this is an iNaturalist observation on the right here, and this one was off of the coast of Marin. And people have actually seen them also on the coast of Sonoma. But those tend to be kind of like juvenile males who are trying to look for their own territory, and so they're swimming north to kind of check things out. But usually, eventually, they go back south again. So we don't have established populations north of Pigeon Point, but there is hope that they are continuing to kind of move northward. But what we have not had on the north coast, like the Mendocino coast, for a really, really long time is a population of sea otters. To go along with that, bringing sea stars back into the story, these sunflower stars are voracious predators. They will eat, most sea stars are opportunivores. They'll eat almost anything that they can come across and get into their mouth. But these sunflower stars, because they move so fast, are actually pretty important predators in kelp forests. These are also the subtidal species. We see them in the intertidal, but the main population of sunflower stars actually live subtidally at kind of the kelp forest level. And so this is a nice little video kind of showing this sunflower star is going to encounter a bed of scallops. But you can see this is how they move. They can move relatively quickly. This is normal time. That's not sped up at all. Moving across the seafloor there. And then they're going to encounter these scallops. Scallops know that sunflower stars are bad news, so they actually swim away from these sunflower stars. And one thing that sunflower stars eat as well, which is not in this video and is an important part of the story coming up, is that they also eat urchins. And actually, juvenile sunflower stars eat more urchins than adult sunflower stars because they can eat they'll eat little small larval urchins or like just settled urchins. Adult sunflower stars would be eating adult urchins, which they do, but adult urchins are extra pokey and big. So it's actually the juvenile sunflower stars that eat most urchins. And so we have two types of urchins off of our coast, or two primary types along our northern coast, which is the purple urchin and the red urchin. The purple urchin is the main player in this story right now. These are both native. You probably have heard about urchins kind of taking over kelp forests, but these are native species. It's not like they're non-native and invasive. They're just like things are a little out of balance right now. But sunflower stars are important predators of urchins, and this is what those little tiny urchins look like. You can see how these would probably be easier to eat than the big spiky adult urchins. So basically what's happened along our northern coast, and you can see we have kind of a healthy kelp forest on the right side of this diagram and what we call an urchin barren on the left side of this diagram here, is that without sea otters and without sunflower stars basically kind of keeping urchins in check, we've had kind of an explosion of urchins, which have created these urchin barrens. Urchins eat kelp, and what urchins do in particular along the north coast is they go along, they eat kind of the bottom part of the stipe of that kelp, which basically, because again, they have that one stipe up to the big float at the top, they eat that bottom part, and it basically has the kelp breaks off at that point. And this ends up affecting a lot of other species as well, like abalone. Abalone also need kelp and kelp forests. And because of the loss of kelp forests, what we get are these urchin barrens that look like this. We've also had a huge decline in red abalone along our coast as well. And it doesn't help, like I mentioned, that warm water blob, it's shown up more than once. There's that 2014 one, and it showed up again in 2019. So it doesn't help that we continue to have marine heat waves. And urchins, those purple urchins in particular, do just fine with warmer water. While other species that are along the north coast do not like that warm water, those urchins don't mind it, and it's kind of allowed these urchins to continue blooming. So what we've seen basically is a decline, again, in those northern kelp forests that are dominated by this bull kelp. You can see in this map to the right here kind of what the kelp canopy looked like in 2008. And in 2009, those darker spots was what was, or 2019 was what was left of our kelp forests at the time. And so it's kind of all these things together. So it's the historic loss of sea otters, plus the warm water that then allowed sea star wasting disease to happen, which sea star wasting disease then basically extirpated sunflower stars off of our coast, plus continuing warm waters have led to like an explosion of urchin populations, kind of basically things are just out of balance. And so we have more urchins than what we really need. And that huge increase in urchins have basically led to a loss of kelp forests along the north coast. I will point out, though, that there's tons of monitoring going on. Folks have employed people that used to be commercial urchin divers to actually go and do things like this, like vacuum up urchins off the seafloor, or snatch urchins, or just collect them off the seafloor and then monitor those efforts to see what seems to be working. Like if we remove a bunch of urchins, do the kelp forests come back? And the great thing is that we did see, this is a very small section of the Mendocino coast, but we did see kind of a rebound in kelp forests between 2020 and 2021, which is great. And so there is hope. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca to talk a little bit more about like what's currently going on with sunflower stars and what's the Solstice Sea Star Search.
Thanks so much, Alison. If you can move on to the next slide, great. So you just got like an amazing overview from Alison all about kelp forest health, and the role of this incredible starfish or sea star. So we want to talk a little bit about like its current, like what's happening now, and some of the work that a bunch of folks are doing to help aid in its recovery. So first of all, because of that massive decline that you saw in the graphic that showed that almost 87% of all of these stars disappeared from the west coast of North America during the sea star wasting. this sea star has been listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List, which is the IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they assess species for their level of threat or like the endangerment of going extinct. And so this star was listed as critically endangered. And it's also potentially going to be listed on the Endangered Species Act here in the United States. So more to come on that this year. But there is a group of folks convened by the Nature Conservancy who have worked to write a roadmap to recovery for the sunflower sea star. You can see a picture here, and Christina will put a link to this report in the chat if you're interested in reading this like super detailed report on what it will take to help the sea star recover. Because as you can see, not only is it like extremely charismatic and amazing, it plays a really, really important role in kelp forest health. And so this report is a really important guide for us to figure out what to do next. And so as part of the work that Alison and I do, we head up the Thriving California Initiative, which is a new strategic initiative here at the Academy to work to leverage our expertise to help preserve biodiversity here in California and help connect people to nature. It has tons of different amazing projects that I won't go into detail today, but I'm going to talk about a couple of the things that we can do here at the Academy that will leverage our expertise to help save the sunflower star. So the first thing is that we have an incredible team of aquarium biologists who work to rear, not only keep alive and keep healthy all of the animals that you see when you visit the aquarium, but they also have expertise in raising those animals and helping them reproduce. So we have a team that works on corals. We have teams that work on all of our invertebrates, and part of our team has expertise in raising invertebrates, especially endangered invertebrates. So Kylie Lev on our team has worked on an endangered species of abalone here in California. And so she has worked from taking the eggs and sperm of this endangered species and bringing them together and growing the larvae in the lab so they can be outplanted to help that species recover. And so we are super excited to bring Kylie's expertise and add that to the team of people that have been working on raising these stars. There's a group at the University of Washington who has worked to try to raise baby starfish. As you can see here, it's extremely complicated. The picture on the left, you can see this is a spawning sea star. So sea stars are both male and female. They're separate sexes. They release their eggs and sperm into the water. They meet in the water and they go through this very, very complicated larval stage of larval progressions where they metamorphose and change in the water column, like in the plankton. They go through all these different steps until they settle down on like the ocean bottom and look more like actual sea stars. So you can imagine this is very complicated and there are lots and lots of bottlenecks in this process. So we wanted to show you some cool pictures of what this looks like. One of our other colleagues, Alison, who works out of the Long Marine Lab, did this work in her lab and took pictures. So you can see how long it takes also to get from day 3, which looks like just a handful of cells, to over like months of this little baby Pycnopodia developing in the water until it looks like this tiny, tiny baby star at the very bottom of this page. So this complicated process is key if we want to figure out how to potentially reintroduce these stars back into the ocean. There are a few starfish that are in different aquaria across the country that that are from California originally that they can use in this process. But it takes, they want to have a lot of people doing this work at different institutions. So we have some kind of security and backup as you're trying to work with these super critically endangered species. And so our team is super happy and has the expertise to bring to this problem to help work with all the people that have laid the groundwork for trying to figure out the reproductive cycle of this starfish. And maybe if it works, we'll be able to have this starfish on exhibit here at the Academy. And the other thing that we're super excited to do is bring our expertise. You go to the next slide, Alison. I don't know, I can't see the next slide, but maybe all of you can. Great, is to bring our expertise in engaging people in the tide pools to observe nature to this problem. So as Alison said, we run and co-direct our community science team, and we've been working for years in the tide pools to do some monitoring. And the other thing that we do while we're out with folks is we encourage everyone who's out on the reef to take pictures of all of the plants and animals that they see using an app and a website called iNaturalist that I'll talk a little bit in just a few slides. But we have been working out at one spot at Pillar Point, south of San Francisco. It's where the Mavericks surf contest happens. We've been working there for just about 10 years. And when we first started working in this place, we didn't have a species list for this amazingly diverse reef. But by working together with volunteers, we've been able to build this like robust species atlas of everything that's found at this site. So you can see this is just a snapshot of all the different species that we can see and find at Pillar Point, and it's over 800 species. And because we're out there all the time with volunteers, we were able to witness the sea star wasting that Alison talked about before. So we're out there doing our regular monitoring, taking pictures on iNaturalist, sharing those photos. We were able to witness the wasting, you can see here, with these stars with symptoms of the wasting disease, and the recovery of this is the Pycnopodia acraceus. This is not the sunflower star. But we could see this at one place, right? One place that we visited a lot. But we knew that this was also, the starfish wasting was happening up and down the coast. So we wanted to be able to get a picture of what was happening all along the coast, not just at Pillar Point. So we started a big community science campaign called Snapshot Cal Coast that happens every summer along the coast of California, where we work with partners up and down the state to get their communities out to the tide pools to observe and document all of the different species, sea stars and all of the other species they see out on the coast. And then we mobilize those data to help answer some questions. And so what Snapshot Cal Coast looks like is people out in the tide pools taking pictures like this of the plants and animals that they see. And if you haven't used iNaturalist, this is how it works. So you take a photo with your phone or with a camera, and then there's a computer vision that provides suggestions for identifications based on the photo and where you are. You can also add your own identification if you know, but it's super cool if you don't, because it will make suggestions for you. Because you're using your phone most often, it automatically records the date and the time and the location of those observations. And then you upload it to iNaturalist, and that's visible to the entire iNaturalist community, which will help confirm your identification. And so we've been using this incredible tool, iNaturalist, for all of this work that I described. And for Snapshot Cal Coast, people get out along the coast for those 2 weeks over the summer. It looks really different in different places, but people get out and together and look for as many species as they can and document all those species using iNaturalist. And together, we collect hundreds of thousands of data points that give us a snapshot of where different species are found year over year. So we can look for changes, we can pick up things and get a better understanding of things like the starfish wasting disease and other changes that we're seeing along our coast. And we have an incredible team of data scientists, so next slide, Alison, that can use these data that will help show things like starfish wasting. So remember, all of the data that are making these graphs are individual observations that people are taking as they're walking on the beach, and they might see a starfish and they take a picture and upload it to iNaturalist. But all those collectively, you can see here, this black line shows us the massive decline in that Pycnopodia acraceus, that ochre star that we saw during the sea star wasting. And you can see this light gray line is sea surface temperature. So you can see it was that increase, the increase in sea surface temperatures contributed or was correlated with the decline of these starfish. And so we can do all of this with data that are collected by regular people out there on the coast. And so we've talked a lot about Pyzastera loquacius because there's a lot of data on those on iNaturalist and other places. So I wanted to show you a little bit about what we know about Pycnopodia, or the sunflower star from iNaturalist. So between 2008 and 2014, there were 85 observations of Pycnopodia along our coast. So you can see them here, kind of pretty well distributed along the coast. And you can look at some of these pictures, and these are big, healthy, beautiful stars. And then if you look at the observations that have been made since January 2015 to now, there have been only 24 observations. And if you look at these pictures here, the stars are a little bit smaller. Some of these are multiple observations, right, of the same individual. So it's fewer than 24 individuals that have been reported on iNaturalist. And next slide. So you can see this is just a graph of the observations of, oh, I wanted to mention that since 2015, no stars have been recorded on iNaturalist south of the Monterey Bay either, which is like, that is a significant part of their range. But if you remember that last graph, that were almost 100% of the stars were lost during the wasting. All right, so if you look at all of the observations of Pycnopodia helianthoides over time on iNaturalist, you can just see what I talked about, this like huge decline. And even though it looks like there were a lot of observations in the past, those are pretty small numbers. And that is true, even though, next slide, the number of observations made on iNaturalist has like increased exponentially since actually the starfish wasting happened in 2014. So this is just number of observations through time. You can see how it's just increased dramatically. And also, next slide, the number of users has also increased dramatically. So even with more people using iNaturalist, more people out there with their eyes on the ground, more people participating in Snapshot Cal Coast, that event we run, and we just haven't seen these stars at all. But there are some amazing observations. And so earlier this year in July, there was this little tiny star found in Humboldt County, which got us really thinking and talking with some partners at the Nature Conservancy about what we could do to encourage more people to make observations on iNaturalist of these stars if they see them. Next slide. And then just last month, when I was actually preparing to talk about the Solstice Sea Star Search, I found this observation that someone had uploaded to iNaturalist. This is like a kind of strange picture, but it's a picture of a sunflower star from diving depths, and it's from San Diego. So remember how I said since 2015, there haven't been any observations shared on iNaturalist south of the Monterey Bay. Well, this is the only one. From last month, a diver saw the sunflower star while they were diving off La Jolla. And so this is amazing. To see a pretty big adult star in San Diego is like something super incredible. And then just last week, a diver who was doing some of those surveys that Alison was mentioning, this is an urchin diver who is doing surveys now to look and count urchins in places that they've removed urchins, was diving and recording. And you can see all the urchins, right? This is an urchin barren like Alison was describing. And this person's name is Grant Downey, and he found this incredible, huge, like healthy sunflower star. It's about a foot across. And it was in Mendocino off Fort Bragg. And so this just happened on Friday, actually. You can see how excited he was, right, to find this sea star. So people were like celebrated this find, of course. It was in the local paper, the Mendocino Voice, the slide will come up. This Fort Bragg in Fort Bragg, a diver spotted a critically endangered sunflower sea star, this predator that we need, right? This is like Alison was talking about, the predator that we need to eliminate or kind of control that urchin population to help the kelp rebound. So all of these things have happened, right? All of this research, and then all of these like little findings where people have been seeing, here and there, like a couple sunflower stars. So we thought, together with our partners at the Nature Conservancy, that we would launch a campaign next week during some of the lowest tides of the year, December 20th to 23rd, called the Solstice Sea Star Search. And what we're doing is we're encouraging people to get out along the California coast, tide pooling or diving. If you really, really want to dive in the December in California, awesome. Get out there and dive, and get out there and help look for sunflower stars, but also all sea stars. So what we're asking people to do is to go out to the tide pools during the lowest low tides. You can find the lowest low tides by looking at the NOAA Tide and Current Prediction site, and Christina will put that link up now. And then document any sea stars or starfish you see using iNaturalist. If you are lucky enough to see a sunflower star, then send the iNaturalist observation link to this email. And then there's a separate reporting platform just for sea stars, run by the folks at UC Santa Cruz, and you can report it there as well, because everyone wants to know where all the any sunflower stars that we find are found. So we are super excited, right, at getting lots and lots of eyes on the ground to maybe find sunflower stars, but there are lots of other starfish that you can see on our coast. So there are at least 33 species that have been documented and shared on iNaturalist from the coast of California. So some of these might be familiar to those of you that tide pool or dive, right? The ochre star, bat stars, leather stars, these really cute little six-rayed stars, or other small stars like Henricea. But then there's just amazing diversity of starfish. And you can just see some of the less common stars here and here. So we're pretty lucky to live in a place that we have an incredible diversity of sea stars. And so although we are most interested in sunflower stars, we're also interested in learning more about the distribution of all of these starfish, especially these two that I'm going to highlight. So this starfish, which is called Prizester brevis, it's in the same genus as that ochre star. It's called the pink short-spined star, maybe is the common name. So this star is another one that was very, very hard hit by the wasting disease. In fact, I don't think I've seen it alive since 2015, but it's kind of like the forgotten, more boring star maybe, although it's beautiful, compared to the sunflower stars. So we're really interested in people looking for this star. And it's found in tide pools, but actually its preferred habitat is sandy beaches. So sometimes you can see it washed up on beaches or in rocky areas that are adjacent to sandy beaches. And then the next star is another Pyzaster called Pyzaster giganteus, although this one is pretty small. It's a beautiful blue and orange star, and it also has not recovered as well as many of the other starfish since the wasting. So we're hoping that people can get out on their own or with a group. There are lots of our partners who are holding events to get people out tide pooling in the afternoons during the solstice at these really beautiful low tides. And we're holding an event at Pillar Point, which is the place I mentioned before that we work regularly. On December 22nd, we'll be out at Pillar Point at 3 o'clock. We would love to have people join us. There's a bit.ly link here that you can follow to sign up on our Eventbrite to attend this event with a bunch of other people. So it'll be fun to be together. But you can also get out on your own anywhere that there are rocks, pier pilings, any place that you might see sea stars. Take some pictures and upload them to iNaturalist and help us document where starfish are found along our coast. And with that, we will bring Alison back and we can answer any questions people might have.
Hi, and thank you so much, both. That was so fascinating, and I cannot believe how cute baby sunflower stars are. I didn't know. It's so cute. The 23 days post settlement one.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right?
Yeah. So we have some questions from our members. First one, Amy asked kind of when you started the presentation, Alison, and it's a really good question, is why is there so much warm water? Like, why did that even happen in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big general answer is climate change, right? That we tend to see these marine heat waves happening more often and are more intense, like with greater frequency, due to climate change, which is changing currents in the ocean and changing sea surface temperatures, which also then affects currents. And like so, it's kind of a vicious cycle. But kind of the big broad answer is climate change is leading us to have more of these marine heat waves.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and then another question is, why is it so much harder for sunflower sea stars to come back? Like, is it just because their process, it takes so long for them to become adults, or are they spawning less than before? What are some of the reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is both of those things. I mean, I think they were more susceptible to the wasting, so they were harder hit.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then because these species, many invertebrate species like the sunflower star, because their sperm and egg have to meet in the water, they have to be close enough to each other for that to happen.
Got it.
And so the
Hmm.
fewer, if they're like really spread out, then it's a lot harder. And the time, as you saw, even just imagining that time in the plankton, right? How long that is, it takes an incredible amount of time for them to get to that, 3 weeks post settlement to like a reproductive size. It's years.
Right.
And so,
Right.
I
Wow.
guess this is like maybe what we're seeing is some of these really small ones that were hiding and maybe actually made it through the wasting. Now they're maybe getting big enough for us to see them. Like that would be like a very
Hmm. I hope
optimistic,
so.
like um or maybe they've been in really deep water. There are some thoughts like because they've done better in places with cooler water like Alaska and Washington and British Columbia, that maybe they're really deep here and they've been doing okay, and there are
Hmm.
enough of them that maybe their larvae are settling in the intertidal. Um, but I think if you're really interested in these kinds of questions, that roadmap to recovery has like,
Hmm.
it's an incredible body of work by people in this Pycnopodia recovery group who have spent a couple of years like doing tons of research and putting it all together in this document that really is like an incredible body of work that helps us
Yeah.
really all think about what we can do to help solve this problem.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. We have a comment question from George, who says, I've heard that the urchins and the barons are in a sort of diapause from starvation. Please comment.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that people looked at were like, well, people eat urchins, right? Like uni is like the
Hmm.
gonads from inside the urchins, and so people were thinking like maybe we could just harvest all of these and like eat them basically. And what people have found is that once, because urchins eat kelp, that once they have created these barrens, there actually isn't any more food to eat. And so as people have collected them and cracked them open, they have found that they're basically like almost completely empty inside. But
Hmm.
they can go into kind of this like hibernation, like stasis period where like even though they're starving and they're not getting any food, it's actually not killing them. They can basically just like hunker down and just like not move as much and not do, and probably like aren't reproducing as much either because they don't have like the resources to put into that. But they can basically just hang
Right.
out and survive until like they'll also eat like drift things. Like if things are coming down from the surface, they'll totally eat like any seaweed or kelp that kind of ends up on the bottom of the seafloor as well. But yeah, they
Hmm.
do find that they can kind of just like chill, um, even though they're starving and they don't have any food.
Wow. Yeah. And then more questions from Eric, who says they will go tide pooling, but not diving. Any tips for how to find and notice the sea stars, especially stars other than ochre stars?
So that's a good question.
Mhm.
All right. So I think the best way, this is actually a good tide pooling tip for finding anything that's
Ooh,
small
good.
and maybe you haven't seen before, is to go to pools, pools that are pretty big, that are pretty close to where the waves are crashing, but not getting that
Mm.
direct waves crashing right on them. Ochre stars love the direct waves. So, like, if you want to see ochre stars, I'll tell people who might have that question, find mussel beds and find big waves, and you'll find ochre stars. But the others, it's more like big pools with, with algae, calm-ish
Okay.
water, even though it's pretty close to where the waves break. And then just like look really carefully, right? So look along the edges, like look under underhangs. Underhangs are
Mm,
good.
In cracks, if you could find a
In
crack and
cracks,
look down
I
in
like,
them.
yeah, looking down into cracks.
Yeah.
If you're at a beach that it's allowed to turn rocks over, you can turn rocks over and look underneath. Just make sure that
mm,
you lift up a rock, so you pull the rock toward you so things can get away if there are things underneath, and that you put it back how you found it carefully if there are
yes.
things underneath, and check the rules because some beaches don't allow that kind of moving of things. So often you'll find little stars like stuck to the bottoms of rocks. Like you'll
Like
turn
little
it over and you'll
babies.
find like
Yeah.
little baby bat stars and little baby other stars. You might find brittle stars also. It's not one of the things we're necessarily looking for, but you should take pictures of like other species
Mhm.
too. Like you don't have to just be like, I'm only taking pictures of starfish. You can take pictures of seaweeds or nudibranchs or and oftentimes I find like a lot of the smaller stars, like some of these 6-rayed stars and some of the other small stars, are kind of in the similar places to where you find nudibranchs. Like they just have a similar, like it's a pretty diverse place, and they kind of sometimes are near each other. But sometimes it's just staying still and just looking and
Yeah.
scanning and looking. Um, and one of the things I try to think about is like a lot of times they're smaller than you think. So if you're looking
Mm,
for things ochre star size, like most of these other stars are smaller, like significantly smaller. Like some of these 6-rayed stars are like, like the size of a 50-cent piece, right? A quarter.
oh,
So they're a lot smaller. So
okay.
you have to like adjust your search image a little bit.
That's yeah. I always think of sea stars like you just kind of go in with your hand. You can kind of like, But okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
some are
No,
small.
those are fantastic tips. These two are tide pooling experts. Like if there was a Olympics in tide pooling, these two. Um, and then finally, Gina asks, are there current instances of the sea star wasting disease? Is it still happening?
Yeah, it definitely still is. Especially, as we can kind of continue to have those marine heat waves, that we do still find wasting disease out there. You can imagine, that a lot of
Mm,
the ones that have survived through wasting disease, and this is kind of across species, are the ones that like the ones that were more resistant to it in the beginning. And so what we haven't seen is like the total devastation that we saw in like 2013, 2014. But you
yeah.
can still find, there's a site that I go to on the Sonoma coast a lot, and I was there like 1 week and took a photo of like a whole bunch of stars. And then I was there 2 weeks later, took that same photo, and like so many of them, like they had wasting disease like 2 weeks
Mm,
later, and I could see that they were like drooping and getting those white lesions. And so you can definitely still find stars that have wasting disease, and it's something that, again, because it seems like it's something that's like always with the stars, like either their microbial community or those viruses that are always associated with them, and it's this warm water that seems to kind of trigger them to bloom and damage the
mhm.
stars. That like I think it's something that we'll probably continue seeing going forward, but hopefully not with the like incredible devastation that we saw when the first round hit, because we have more stars that are
Yeah,
more resistant to it now.
yeah, great. Well, I think that's it for our questions, but thank you so much, Rebecca and Allison, for joining us. Yeah, I hope this search uncovers, like, I hope we find a couple sunflower sea stars. It'd be so exciting.
That would
Like,
be
it looks like
amazing.
the trend is up, even if the trend is
Good.
just like 2 sightings.
Right.
Yes.
So,
The more eyes on the water, maybe
more
we'll we'll
eyes.
we'll find more. So
Yeah. So again, like the links are in the chat to sign up to join us. And so we really hope to see some of you out at Pillar Point next week, or just see some of your observations on iNaturalist. So I'm going to say goodbye to Alison and Rebecca. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
bye. Thanks, Christina. Bye, everyone.
And yeah, again, members, thanks so much for joining us and for your support as always. Like I said, this is our last virtual talk of the year, but keep your eyes peeled for more member events in 2023. Bye, everyone.